Welcome. This is Huntley Hope. We're so glad that you joined us. Today we're going to be diving into marriage, which is such an important topic to talk about. But what we're going to talk about is a little bit more for mature audiences, I think. So if there's kids in the room, just be aware.
Well, Cheryl, you know that marriage is not a noun. It's actually a verb. And it isn't something you get. It's something you do. It's the way you love your partner every day.
That's a great quote. Well, you know, there's no question that marriage is hard work. And sometimes you get sidetracked. We're going to hear from one such couple who has a story just like that in a moment.
Now, although marriage is rarely a fairy tale, it shouldn't be dangerous. Now, sadly, 1 in 3 American women have been either physically or sexually abused by their husband or boyfriend at some point in their life. At least 30% of all female murder victims were killed by their spouse or significant other, leaving literally the most dangerous time for a woman is when she's being abused.
That's so upsetting. Well, today we're going to delve into domestic abuse, but also marital reconciliation. You know, we love telling life stories, real stories, stories that highlight the extraordinary power of God's love in ordinary people's lives.
Right now, we are going to meet a couple who sadly separated their marriage after 12 years. But at their lowest point, both Sam and Naomi Tita experienced something that would change them forever. Here's their story.
Back home in Guyana, my parents, they were hardworking people. As a result, we weren't necessarily always monitored by an adult. I remember often having to run to be at a neighbor's house or run to my own house because there was a man chasing after me, trying to grab me, and then I just ran. I was 8 years old. You know, there was another situation when this other young man actually went a lot further. Because of my experience of always trying to run away from someone who was trying to attack me or trying to find a way to keep someone from molesting me, I think those things caused me to fall into to depression. And I kept those secrets from my family members until today. I always had this desire in my heart to get married at the age of 20. Lo and behold, when I was 19 years old, I happened to meet Sam.
And when I met Naomi, I knew that if I missed her, I was going to be in trouble. So at the age of barely 20, I knew that I needed to get married to this woman. We were young, full of ambition. The world seemed like a place we could definitely conquer. And so we had a good life.
I started to share things about secrets that I had kept about myself. Not everything. I remember after I had the children, Sam wanted me to go back out to work. And I wouldn't. And the reason was I didn't want to leave my children just in case someone tried to do something to them. I stayed at home, but I never expressed to Sam why I felt a need to stay at home.
What I didn't realize at the time was that there were still a lot of things she didn't tell me in terms of the struggles she had had growing up as a young person. And it had to do with anxiety, which led to some mild forms of depression. In the 12th year of our marriage, I literally felt as though I had a rope around my neck with a large stone attached to it. And I felt like I was choking.
I felt as though I was less than zero. There was no hope for my life. I felt if I died, no one would notice because I couldn't live up to his expectations and even my expectations. I wanted more for myself.
I was at the pinnacle of my career. However, at home, because of the unhappiness that I was feeling, which I'm sure evoked some tension in our marriage and in Naomi as well, at that point, I just felt like, you know what, if I don't cut and run now, we will both drown. That was how I felt. And so I got up one day and I walked away from my wife and I walked away from my children. My daughter, I remember where she laid on the bed. She was sleeping. And I looked at her and how innocent she was and how she had nothing to do with this. She didn't ask to be born. All she wanted was peace and loving parents at home. And I was leaving. But I think I felt somewhere that if I didn't leave, that we would all drown. So here I was at the pinnacle of my career, walked away from a great job at a great financial institution and moved into a shelter where, I mean, you had to sleep with your shoes on. I'm thinking, what am I doing here? Like, how did this happen? I'm from Cameroon. You know, we don't do anxiety, we don't do depression. It was the most terrible time in my life. And the crazy thing is, the very thing that had caused my marriage to disintegrate, which was anxiety, depression, it gripped me. I began sensing the kind of darkness that my wife had experienced a good portion of her life.
When Sam left, it was the lowest point of my life. I spent most of my days in bed. I couldn't get out even to go to the store. But I remember having a friend, a great friend. He knew the Lord, and eventually he did invite me to church. I went to church. I gave my life to the Lord. It took a while for me to grow in my faith, but I found that there were certain television programs that I held on to. I would stay up late in the night. I would look at Night Live, and I look forward to seeing it. It was like a lifeline for me.
When I was in the darkest time, the darkest season of my life, it occurred to me that a book that I had meant to write a long time ago, now I had time. It was called Reconstructing God, Proposals Towards an Optimum Humanity. Because in my search for God, I hadn't found him. But you see, God allowed that book to go into the hands of some family and friends who prayed for me at the same time that my wife was praying for me. Eventually, my wife's prayers and their prayers combined, and on the streets of Houston was where I met Jesus Christ. I knew I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do it by myself. I didn't have the answers. And so I pulled over to the side of the road, and alone in my car, I gave my life to Christ that day. Naomi, in the meantime, continued to pray. She had become saved and believing that she and I would get back together.
Even though Sam had left and I felt abandoned and I knew he was seeing other people, I never gave up hope of him returning.
Got into a relationship with this woman, and we were together for over a year, and then something happened. I sensed God saying to me, "Go back home to your wife." I said, "You know what? If this is what you want from me, then I'm gonna do it." Once I said that, it was like I had a heart surgery. A new love for my wife was just injected into my heart. And I became so hopeful. I saw a future that did not exist previously. I saw Naomi and I raising our children and doing things together and doing ministry together, building a home again. And I couldn't understand what had happened. So one of the first things I did was I picked up the phone and I called Naomi. I asked if she would forgive me, if she would accept me back. I don't think she even had time to think about it. It's like she was ready for this relationship to be restored, and she said yes.
When Sam came back, I found that he was a very different man. He was on fire for God. He came back letting me know that he really loved his children and nothing will take him away from us again.
We could draw the sword and bend the bow. And then one day, right in church, a sister came and said, you know, Brother Sam, Paul Willoughby, who is a good friend of mine, he hosts this program, and he's looking for a guest.
Good morning. Welcome to Nightlight Live. I'm your host, Paul Willoughby.
And so we went that night, and then I get this email from Paul, and Paul says, Sam, I think you'll make a great host. Come and host the show.
Welcome to Nightlight Live. I am your host this morning, Sam Tita.
The very program that was Naomi's, literally her spiritual lifeline, and the desires of her heart, that she would be connected to that ministry, both Nightlight and 100 Huntley Street. It just came to pass in a way that only God could orchestrate.
I was afraid of a lot of things.
Well, God has given us a lot of opportunities and opened up a lot of doors for us to encourage and minister to other people. Brother at church last week, I mean 5 years after, last week he comes up to me, we're in a gathering, and he says to me, brother, I just gotta come talk to you guys. And my wife and I, our marriage had broken up. But I happened to be on 100huntley.com, and I watched and I listened to your testimony with your wife about what God did in your life. And I have to testify that my marriage is back together. Oh my goodness. I mean, I'm a softie, and I of course, I'm shedding tears, I'm crying. And this is happening right across the world. People are getting blessed by it. I've just found that to be completely amazing.
Crossroads, the ministry of Nightlight Live and 100 Huntley Street has been a blessing to me and my family. It brought me to a place right now where I see a future of limitless possibilities.
Cheryl, I just love the happily ever after stories, but it's not always the case. There's many people I'm sure watching today that are going through marital difficulty or situations that are real difficult.
And that's why we're here. We want to be able to bring a resource to you to get the support you need in those tough moments of your life. Hey, if you're going through something in your marriage, you need some prayer, give us a call, 1-866-273-4444.
And we're only able to bring you these quality stories such as Sam and Naomi's because of your financial support. And we certainly encourage you to give today. And we're more than just entertainment. We're a place that provides resources in all of life's journeys. And we'll continue with a tragic story of domestic abuse right after this.
God's love is like a fire. When it ignites and when it spreads, it can transform anyone.
I called 100 Huntley Street the prayer line, and that was a real turning point in my salvation.
We serve a God who can take the ashes, the broken pieces of our life, and he can make something beautiful.
I said, God, if you're this real, I will do anything that you want me to do.
God's love story can inspire anyone to make a difference in the lives of people around the world.
We are very sure, we are very optimistic about our future because we know we will plant, we will have water to drink.
You become influential by setting a new pace. The gospel is timeless.
Every single person has a story, but we're all part of God's greater story, which is the greatest story of all.
And we so appreciate all that you do for us. You know, to be able to bring shows like this and tell these kinds of stories, we need your support. If you want to be part of what we're doing to spread God's love across this nation, give us a call at 1-800-265-3100 or go to 100huntley.com.
Well, coming up next, a woman who endured untold abuse at the hands of her husband. Here's Cheryl's interview with Kamal Dhillon.
Kamal Dhillon grew up dreaming of what every little girl dreams of, a fairy tale romance with a man who would love her and treat her with kindness, gentleness, and respect. Unfortunately, her arranged marriage into a prominent, wealthy family was endured horrific torture and abuse. It took years for her to escape that relationship, but today, Kamal is a courageous warrior on behalf of victims of domestic violence. She's here today to tell her story. Kamal, thank you so much for coming.
Yes, Cheryl, thank you for having me back.
You know, I've read your book a number of years ago, but I read it again, and honestly, it's hard to read. Like the torture that you went through is unprecedented. Your book is black and blue sorry. You certainly tell it in more detail there, but give us a sense of, when we say domestic abuse, that sounds so sanitized. What were you experiencing in your marriage?
Yeah, I think abuse is a very underrated word, because when you read my story, it's raw and it was full of torture. I actually went through the stage of abuse where I was called names and I was slapped and pushed. I believe that is abuse. But it got to the point where he would tie me, he would strip me, burn me with cigarettes, hang me, douse me with kerosene. Like, the torture just went on, and it would last for hours at a time.
I honestly have to say, like, I don't really know how to communicate the horrific nature of what you went through. And this went on for how many years?
12 and a half.
So I think a lot of people, you know, they hear, like, you've been electrocuted. He tried to drown you. On many occasions, he tried to kill you. Had your kids beating you, like trying to get your kids to hit you, doing much of this in front of your children. And then there's sexual torture. And I don't even want to go into it all, but you know, I think a lot of people hear these stories and they go, why didn't you leave? Or when you did leave, why did you come back? So help me understand what goes on in the mind of someone who's being manipulated like you were.
You know, Cheryl, the worst question somebody could ask you is, why did you stay? And then the next thing they say is, so it wasn't that bad. You stayed that long and you had children. Well, now in my talks that I do throughout US and Canada, I tell people never to ask that question, because you know what? I was always telling you guys. I always told you guys I needed help. I may not have spoken the words physically, but my fear, if you gave it a minute to look at me, you would see fear in my eyes. You would see the pain. You would see me begging, but you didn't listen. You didn't stay long enough. Why I stayed? First of all, where would I go? I was abandoned. I had to stick around in my marriage for my sisters. I had to make sure that the family name, the family pride was intact.
So your sisters could get married, because if your family reputation was ruined, they wouldn't be able to be in an arranged marriage.
Yeah, and the ones who are married would stay married. That I would not bring shame to them. And so I had the burden of an entire community. So I had to forget my own and live with them.
Plus you had your children.
I had 4 children that were brainwashed that this woman is not really your mother, and that we are going to get a better mother for her, so let's get rid of her. My husband, throughout my marriage, with the help of the children, they were planning my funeral. And fast forward, I was actually the one with the children cremating him.
Yeah, that's a powerful story, and we're going to get there. You did leave him several times, and one of the near the end, when you left him because you knew he'd almost killed you, and there was an intervention. Tell me about that day. You were walking off. He walked off a pier and you couldn't swim, and he was trying to drown you.
Yeah, and that's actually the front page, the cover of my book. He had taken me to this ocean before, so when we took this exit this last night, I knew that I had moments to live. And I thought, okay, how do I even hug my children goodbye? How do I whisper in their ears that their mother loved them? And even in death, she will continue to love them. And this wasn't my plan. And I couldn't. So when I was pulled out of the car, felt like a prisoner led to the slaughter. And I'm going, wanted to say goodbye and just give them a kiss, but they closed their eyes. And they were 2 to 8 years old. So I just waved goodbye, because in the next 2 minutes, they will come and identify a body, if there was one. And as I'm going to the end of this pier, I'm whispering, mumbling, hoping my children can hear me in the back, in the car. And I said, my babies, this was never my plan. I hope that all 4 of you stick together and love each other. And to my boys, I said, will you never, ever leave your sisters alone? Because they will become his next victims. And then I remembered my mom and dad, and I said, where are you? You abandoned me. Today your daughter is dying.
Now, you were being drowned by him off the edge of that pier, and you were crying out for help, and thankfully someone actually came along. There was a light shone. You don't know where that light came from. Do you see that as God's intervention in that moment?
I did not at the time. I honestly thought a caretaker with a very bright flashlight. I actually did not see the man. I did not communicate with him. He just disappeared after I was able to go back to safety. But I called him names in my head, and I'm thinking, you coward, you chicken. And his presence, the light, was the only reason I was saved. My life was spared. That, fast forward several years when I came to know God. I had too many gods in my life, so I didn't want God. My husband was my God. You know, they were idols. And so when I was introduced to Jesus, I didn't want to know him. But I found out that that light, that voice, that presence was of God.
You know, part of your story, so many parts of your story really touched me, but one thing I loved is you were at the airport. You had left your husband soon after that drowning incident, knowing that if you didn't leave, you'd be dead. You had to leave your 4 kids behind. It was one of the hardest things you'd ever done. You were at the airport ready to come to Vancouver, and there was a woman there that saw you in pain. She saw you, a woman of faith, and she began to tell you about the love of God. You didn't even want to hear it. What was it about what she said that finally broke through to you?
First, it was her persistence, you know, her patience. If somebody talked to me like that those days, I would have left, because I kept saying, are you a Jesus freak? You know, what do you want? Leave. Because I had huge trust issues. Yeah. I didn't trust anybody. And the moment she said, I'm here because God wants you to know that he loves you. And so I had a lot to say after that. And then, why would a loving God allow this? I think all of us ask that question. Now I change my question and I say, why not? If he could choose me to carry that, yeah, I have a heavy cross, but you know what? This is what's giving others hope. If I didn't have these scars, how would people believe? And it is still true, seeing is believing. So when she said, God loves you very much, and would you talk to God like you talk to me? Because you have a personal relationship. He does understand your anger, your pain, your hurt. And one day you will find out why you went through what you went through.
Yeah. You started talking to God right that day on the plane to Canada. You started talking to God and asking him for the things that were in your heart. I want to have a home. I want to have my children back. I want to be healed. I want to be free of this man. And it was a process, but God began to answer those prayers. But the one, and I want to say, like, it's all in the book, so we can't detail it all here for time's sake, but you were able to break free of him. You were able to get all your kids back eventually after a number of years. You were able to, be free of that marriage and move on with your life. But the big thing was the bitterness that was in your life, and well-deserved. Can I just say, like, if anybody had a case to be bitter, if people read what happened to you, you had a right, and you felt that. A lot of women in the church were saying, Kamal, you got to give that up. It's destructive for you. And you were like, I can't forgive this. How did you finally get there?
You know, when the women would tell me, you need to forgive him, but I didn't know who I was forgiving and why I was forgiving. In my naive baby Christian attitude, I thought if I did forgive him, God would still forgive me for not forgiving him. And so I just justified that was okay until I got a call. And by this time, I've got all my 4 children. God is working overtime in my life, just to show me that he loves me. That was the whole purpose of God, is I never left you. Even when you didn't know me, when you were going through your beatings, when you were black and blue and bleeding, I was collecting them. I was covering you. And so when I could not forgive my husband until I got this call that he was dead, that he had died. And that was the day that I could shed tears. That was the day I released. And that was the day that my life began as I cremated, before I cremated his body, I said, I choose to forgive you. And everything that you did, your family did, I burn it. I no longer will carry it. Sure, it wasn't something that was like right away, you know, it was off my shoulders and I was free. I still had to go through the emotions and the process. But the more, it was like I was just hanging on to the hem of the garment of Jesus. I had no one, just him. And, you know, after that, yeah, I was free from his abuse, but I went through so much medically with 10 jaw surgeries and other problems, the heart attack, you know, but nothing stops me. Today, I'm, you know, an advocate for women. I just say to women, you can do it. I empower, not just women, men, children.
But you continue on to be a voice for women. I know statistically there are people watching this program that are suffering from abuse of many sorts. What would you say to people who feel like you did? You felt culturally trapped. You felt shame trapped. You felt you had no options. You were responsible for kids. You didn't have a degree. You were married young. What would you say to people who are watching this who really feel like, you don't understand, Kamal, I don't have any choices?
Yeah. Everybody has a choice. We all have a choice. Nowadays, I was in a era when we didn't even have a cell phone. I didn't even know resources. Now I'm saying to women, to victims, do you know your worth? Do you know how much you're valued? How much you're mattered? Don't stay in a marriage. Don't stay in a relationship. Get help. He needs help. She needs help. Whatever it is, do it for yourself. Do it for your children. We need to be those examples. Because if I had stayed, I know that my 2 girls would have been still victims. Because that's what they saw of their mother. And I know that my boys would have portrayed daddy's behavior. But I'm so happy to say that my youngest, one of the victims that was kidnapped, has married and gone on to be an RCMP. And one of the things he said as he was leaving for Regina, he said, Mom, I could not protect you then, but I'll protect you now. And I'll protect all the Kamals out there. And I know that my son will. And I know that he knows pain. And it's made him into a different person.
Thank you for all you're doing. If you haven't been told lately, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, listen, if you're watching this program and you feel trapped wherever you are, you need to know there is a way of escape and there is a way out. You know, one of the issues with Kamal's life was a culture of shame where she couldn't talk. And we were talking just before this interview and she said, the one thing I'd want to say is listen to your daughters. Listen to your daughters when they come to you and say what's happening and do something about it. Let's have eyes to see around us, the people that are hurting. When we see someone crying at the airport, let's go over and persist and find out what's going on in their life. Let's not just mind our own business when people around us are hurting and suffering. If you're going through something today that you don't feel like you can talk to anyone about, that there is a culture of silence and shame, we want you to give our prayer lines a call. It's 100% anonymous. We're just going to listen to you, support you, pray for you, give you resources that you need. We want to help you today to get out of whatever you're in and walk into freedom. Please give us a call.
It was such an intense, emotional interview, and what a hero Kamal is, but she still needs prayer.
She does. She's going with ongoing health concerns, surgeries on her face because of what he did, and so financially, all of that, keep praying for her. And we just want to say, listen, if any of you watching right now are in that situation where you're in an abusive relationship or you know someone who does, we want you to give our prayer lines a call. And I want to say to you, heart to heart, don't stay. You don't have to stay in that relationship. You need to protect yourself. You need to protect your kids first, and then you deal with the other. Give us a call right now, 1-866-273-4444. We can give you resources that help you get healing and get free.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for your ongoing support of Crossroads, a member of the Canadian Council of Christian Charities. You can write to Crossroads, P.O. Box 5100, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 4M2.